All right, a quarter of the way through. I can't believe it. Wow. All right, so we're at Chilperic II, with a small mention of Clotaire IV, which is up here in the image. Chilperic II. Now, notice all of a sudden they're putting in these, diagonals in their costume. Go figure. I don't know if that was really of the time, official, or not, or they're just making fun of. But I think it was of the time official. I mean, why would they alter it all of a sudden? During that where is that? We're looking at 1716. Apparently diagonal stripes were in vogue. This monarch, Chilperic II, was in the 45th year of his age when he ascended the throne. He was an old dude. Scorning the spiritless indolence of his immediate predecessors, his reign was distinguished by activity and vigor. Accompanied predecessors marched into Austrasia to oppose the pretensions of Charles Martel. Radibod, Duke of the Frisians, who was in alliance with him, had passed the Rhine and advanced to the gates of Cologne. Charles attacked him before he could be joined by the royal army. But though the nobleman displayed the most intrepid courage, he was overpowered by numbers. After this victory, the Frisians formed a junction with the Neustrians and the two armies, having ravaged the whole country from the Ardennes to the Rhine, laid siege to Cologne. Oh my gosh. All right, so we have this old king all of a sudden put into place, and they're starting wars right away. But Plectrude averted the storm by the payment of the considerable sum of money, which was no sooner received than Radibod of Chilperic returned home. Charles, in the meantime, had collected the scattered remains of his army and thrown himself into the forest of Ardennes with 500 men, in order to profit by any favourable circumstance that might occur. He had not been long in his situation when the king fixed his camp at Amblesse, a royal mansion situated on the river of that name, near the Abbey of Stavelot. An Austrian soldier applied to Charles and offered to throw the Neustrian army into disorder, provided he should be permitted to attack it alone. He accordingly marched towards the camp and found the Neustrians armed and defenceless. He attacked them sword in hand, and exclaiming with a loud voice, "Here is Charles with his troops," bore down all resistance. The whole camp became a scene of confusion, and Charles, observing the consternation that prevailed among them, advanced with his men and put the Neustrians to flight. They fled with so much precipitation that Chilperic and Ranfroy had scarcely time to escape. This victory increased the reputation of Charles and revived the hopes of his party. The Austrasians flocked to his standard in crowds, and he soon found himself enabled to carry the war into the enemy's country. As soon as the season would permit, he opened the campaign, and passing the Carbonarian forest, pushed his destructive march as far as Cambrai, where he was met by Chilperic. A battle ensued, and the village of Vichy was long disputed with equal spirit. But Charles, though inferior in numbers, at length obtained a complete victory, put the Neustrian army to flight, and pursued the king to the gates of Paris. Finding that capital prepared for a vigorous resistance, he suddenly changed his course and marched to Cologne, which opened its gates to him. Plectrude was obliged to give up the treasures of Pépine and to surrender her grandsons, Theodold, Hugh, and Arnauld, whom the conqueror secured. By this means Charles became master of all that part of the French Empire, and again caused himself to be proclaimed Duke of Austrasia. 718. Notwithstanding his recent success, he was still of opinion that his power required a more solid support. He knew the secret attachment of the Austrasians to the descendants of Clovis, and their desire to have a monarch who was sprung from that prince. He therefore resolved to gratify them, and accordingly raised up a phantom of royalty in the person of Clotaire II, who, according to some, was the son of Thierri III, and according to others, of Clovis II. Ranfroy, justly alarmed at this stroke of policy, formed an alliance with the Gascons, who have quitted their native mountains, had, during the preceding reigns, taken possession of that country, which now bears their name. They were commanded by Duke Eudes, a man of talents and address, who, profiting by the troubles which prevailed in the kingdom, extended his conquests, and, seizing all the country beyond the Loire, refused to acknowledge the authority of the king or kingdom of France. To this daring rebel did the court of Neustria apply for assistance, and on condition of being confirmed in the independent possession of what he had usurped, he consented to grant the successor, the succour required. So now we have Chilperic, thus reinforced, marched against the Austrasians in full hopes of success. Through in a full successful. All right, but the intelligence that Charles was advancing towards Soissons produced such a consternation amongst his troops that they refused to face the enemy. Eudes returned with precipitation to Aquitaine. Chilperic followed him, with as much of his treasures as he was able to carry with him, while Ranfroy fled to Angers, where 4 years after he capitulated and submitted to the authority of Charles, who left him the possession of that county for the remainder of his life. So Ranfroy fled to Angers. (719) The conqueror pursued the fugitives, and passing the Seine, took Paris, overran the Orléanois and Touraine, compelled the nobles to proclaim Clotaire, Clotaire king of Neustria and Burgundy, and to elect him mayor of the palace of both kingdoms. But the new monarch did not live long to enjoy his newly acquired dignity. He died either this or the following year at the age of 49, according to Father Leconte, we'll call him, who says he reigned 3 years and a half. But the majority of writers are of the opinion that he only reigned 17 months. His tomb is still to be seen at Coucy en Vermandois. The death of Clotaire was followed by an interregnum. Now that would be the Clotaire IV, I believe we're talking here in this picture. So, where are we here? The death of him. Anyway, occasioned by the policy of Charles, who wished to found the spirit of the people, but finding they still cherished the title and authority of a king. He at length dispatched ambassadors to the Duke of Aquitaine to demand Chilperic, whom Ayode sent to Paris, loaded with magnificent presents. On his arrival at the capital, the prince was proclaimed king of the whole monarchy. Okay, so we're really up for Chilperic right now. And the Duke of Austrasia declared mayor of the palace of the three kingdoms. So the people were getting tired of all these dukes. They just wanted a king. And somehow they knew that. Popular vote, they didn't vote at that time, but they did know it. Having completely established internal tranquility, Charles made a successful expedition against the Saracens, who persecuted with extreme violence the Bructeri, the Achuarians, the Celtae, and the Thuringians, people who strictly preferred their attachment to the Christian faith and to the French monarchy. Soon after his return, Chilperic died at Noyon, where he was buried. This prince did not complete the 5th year of his reign. Though he was unfortunate in most of his undertakings, his merit was conspicuous. His wisdom, goodness, courage, activity, and prudence have procured him as an honourable exemption from the list of Fenians, we call them, Fenian, or indolent princes. An epithet which has justly been bestowed on the later monarchs of the Merovingian race. As he had no children, Charles raised to the throne Thierri IV, son of Dagobert III, surnamed Chelles. The surname of Chelles, that's a long known name, isn't it? Because he had been brought up at that place. Thierri IV, 722. Thierri was in his 8th year when he was proclaimed king of Neustria, Burgundy, and Austrasia. That is the title by which he is distinguished in 2 of his charters, still extant, both of which were drawn up in Austrasia, one at Zulpich, and the other at his castle in Heristol. Charles continued to reign under the name of his infant prince. The remainder of that nobleman's life was one continued succession of wars, battles, victories, and triumphs. He had no sooner subdued the Saxons and recovered possession of all the country, as far as the Weser, must be a river, then his attention was called to the Germans, who he had revolted. 723. Having reduced them to submission, he waged war against the Bavarians, whom he also subdued. And in 725, the Duke of Aquitaine, who took up arms at the same time, was overcome by Charles in 2 different general elections. I'm sorry, I'm thinking elections here. No, 2 general actions. Well, they were kind of, a war was an election in a weird odd way, wasn't it? Well, who's left? Okay, so AD 730, and compelled to sue for mercy. But he had now a more formidable enemy to encounter, as the Saracens had entered France with a powerful army. Oh, looks like France is up for grabs right now. This people, the conquerors of the East and of Africa, had been invited into Spain in 714 by Count Julian, from a wish to revenge himself to Rodrigue, king of the Visigoths, who had dishonored his daughter, or, as some say, his wife, at an interview with Emir Musa, lieutenant to Walid, Caliph of the Saracens. He offered him his country, on condition of receiving immediate succour. Whatever that is, I have to look it up. Eager to embrace so fair an opportunity of extending their conquests, they entered the dominions of Rodrigue and committed the most dreadful devastations. A battle fought on the banks of the river Guataleta, in which the king of the Visigoths was overcome, and he was afterwards slain in the pursuit. This victory decided the fate of the empire. The kingdom of the Visigoths, which had existed for more than 3 centuries, was extinguished, and the nation almost annihilated. A small part of them, indeed, took refuge in the mountains of Asturias, of Galatia, and of Biscay, where they founded a new monarchy under the conduct of Pelagos, from whom the kings of Castile had descended. Some of them retired into France, and such as submitted to the Moors preserved their religion under the name of Mozarabian Christians. So there was a big turmoil here going on, and it's the end of the Visigoths. The conquest of Spain was followed by that of Languedoc and other territories, which the Visigoths still possessed in France. The Saracens first took Albi, Rhodes, Castres, and then besieged Toulouse. They were compelled indeed to raise the siege, but they returned some years after under the conduct of Abel Derrame, when they entered Aquitaine, passed the Garonne, took Bordeaux and Poitiers, burnt the church of St. Hilary, and threatened that Saint Martin at Tours, which was said to contain immense riches. Eudes, alarmed at the rapidity of their progress, applied to the French monarch for assistance, Charles was aware of the Duke's design. He knew that in order to secure his independence, he had formed an alliance with Munuza, a governor of this is a lot back into Spain now, Cerdagne, to whom he had given his daughter in marriage. But his concern for the public good rising, superior to the dictates of private resentment, he marched against the infidels and the united forces of Austrasia, Burgundy, and Neustria. I believe we're talking a lot more in Spain here. I could be wrong, but yeah, Cerdagne. Or Italy, it could be the edge of Italy in the mountains. The two armies in 732 met between Tours and Poitiers, and the battle lasted a whole day. At the close, the superiority of courage and conduct over numbers was evidently manifested. On that memorable occasion, the weighty strokes of Charles first acquired him the surname of Martel, the hammer. Abderrahmane himself was killed, and the bloody field was strewn. If the monkish writers may be credited with the bodies of 375,000 Mahometans, Mahometans, the camp of the Saracens, filled with the spoils of conquered provinces, was pillaged, and the plunder divided among the troops. So here we have 375,000 at the camp of the Saracens. All right. These were big battles, big wars, weren't they? Okay, it is said that Charles, after this victory, instituted the celebrated order, it's the Order of the Genet, which consisted of but 16 knights, who wore a gold collar with 3 chains, in which was suspended a genet of solid gold. Savinus and the Abbé Justiniani assured us that this order was much in vogue under the second race of kings. It does not, however, appear that the military orders were in use before the 12th century, which occasioned Father Menestrier to fix this institution of the Genet at the reign of Charles VII. Okay, so big win there over those 375,000 Mahometans of the Saracens. And I'm still not sure where the Saracens are from, so maybe I'll try to look that up and put it in the description. And there was another check on language in here somewhere that I'll put it through. All right, and now in the next 3 to 4 years, a second eruption of the Musulmans into Provence revived the laurels of Charles, who in a decisive battle again subdued the Frisians and slew their duke. He slew them himself with his own hand. I mean, these guys were not like hanging about on a chair and say, go do it. They were really the kings that fought to the death. And, well, this is, I don't know, Charles was actually, I called him a king, but he was not necessarily that, no. I believe he was classed as a duke. All right, what Charles was. I don't know, these books are so complicated, the way they do it, because they are saying, it's almost like they like to tie everything up later at the end, and almost tease you as to who's who. And I was like, well, no, it's very difficult for us to understand. Don't tease us. But like it was fireside, reading for someone. Very easy to understand and blah, blah, blah. And everybody knew it at the time. But now we're 300 years later. And so it's like, well, yeah, about 250 or so. When this happened, it was even, thousands. But here we have the Duke of Aquitaine, 1,000 plus. So we're dealing with Charles, and I'll have to write exactly what he was. But he was in the reign under the name of this infant prince. So there was a real king. Gosh dang it. Charles is doing all this. He's raising this one to the throne and doing that. But still, I'm not seeing Charles listed as the king. Did I do something wrong here? I'm really thinking he is just in control of all these young princes that are going to be king or declared as king. So I think he's a major duke. Yeah. Let me finish this chapter. Maybe there's a clue. A second eruption on the Mussulmans in the province. Okay, so yeah, he slew their duke, with his own hand. On the death of Eude, Charles granted Aquitaine to Hunalde, the son of that prince, reserving to himself and his heirs the claim of homage, without even mentioning the name of his sovereign. So he's not king. He is not king. He must be just a very, very important duke. A new war against the Saxons in 738, equally successful with the former, terminated the reign of Thierri IV, who died in the 23rd year of his age. It is supposed that he's buried at Saint-Denis. So if you're wondering where Thierry IV is, there he is. Not a fourth position, but I did. We won't mention it. Yes. Saracens. Okay. Oh, right. So, I don't know if that chapter's gone so well. I'm at 27. Having problems with Charles, and he's going to be the Charles Martel Charles, isn't he? Yeah. It's really the policy of this Charles. So he's like in charge of so much. They still cherish the title and authority of a king. So he was still not a king. So Lengthy dispatched ambassadors to the Duke of Aquitaine to demand Chilperic. Charles is coming up with all this stuff, but they still want a Chilperic. Chilperic. Okay, next we have the interregnum. Now, is this going to go on and on, interregnum? I have a feeling... No, it's actually quite a short one. Alright, it's only 3 pages, 4, 5. The interregnum, which ensued on the death of Thierry, lasted 6 or 7 years, according to the general opinion, though the Abbé Conrad, in his chronicle, fixes its duration at 5, and Monsieur de Valois at 4 or 5. Charles thought that the services had rendered the state, the services he had rendered the state ought to have procured him an offer of the crown. So here he is saying, well, I've done all this, can't I be king now? And yeah, he's slain people. So possessed of sovereign authority, he might without impediment I'm the one with the impediment apparently he might without impediment have placed it on his head, but knowing that the French were firmly attached to the royal family, he did not dare to assume a title which would have excited such general envy, and the nobles, who would have been sorry to see him on the throne, had not sufficient resolution to desire he would choose them a king from among the descendants of Clovis. Still, he continued to exert an absolute sway. So he's the king that isn't. Under the title, here we go, thank you, the Duke of the French. So he gets a big title as Duke of the French, which is probably unknown to this time. Pope Gregory II, and one of his letters, styles him Duke and Mayor of the Palace of France, which appears to confirm the idea that he always considered himself as an officer of the kingdom, and not of the king. The Emperor Leo, having published an edict prohibiting the worship of images, which he condemned as idolatrous, and accordingly ordered the objects of such adoration to be taken from the churches and broken into pieces, he was excommunicated by the popes, who excited an insurrection in Italy. So Emperor Leo didn't want to see pictures of anyone. The Lombards, profiting by the opportunity, took possession of Ravenna and threatened Rome itself. Gregory III, a man of inflexible temper, then filled the chair of St. Peter, and was the first of the sovereign pontiffs who took a decisive part in the temporal concerns of princes. A pernicious example that was attended with fatal effects both to the Church and the Empire. He wrote several affecting letters to the Duke of the French to entreat his protection, but Charles, either from regard to Liudprand, King of the Lombards, or from the hope that more advantageous offers might be made him, was in no haste to comply with his urgent solicitations. This affectation of neglect, however, did not discourage Gregory, who sent ambassadors to him with the keys of St. Peter's tomb and some links of the chains with which that apostle had been fettered. Yeah, maybe we can use the word fettered this time. The ambassadors had orders to offer him the consulship of Rome on condition that he should grant them assistance, immediate and effectual. Charles agreed to accord the protection required, but unwilling to break with Liudprand, he remonstrated. God dang it. He remonstrated with him on the impropriety of his conduct in usurping the patrimony of the Church, and urged him to restore what he had taken from the Pope. The King of the Lombards, either from fear or conviction, complied with his request. To this application from Gregory, says the Abbé Velay, was Rome indebted for her temporal greatness, and the family of Charles for its elevation to the empire. Charles, more debilitated by fatigue than age, had been for some time afflicted with a disorder that insensibly preyed upon his constitution. He therefore began to think of settling his family concerns. By his first wife, Rotrud, he had 3 children, Carloman, Pepin, and the princess Hildetrude. By Sonneschild, his second wife, who was niece to Odilon, Duke of Bavaria, he had another son named Grippon, otherly called Griffon. Having convened an assembly of the nobles at Verberie, a country seat near Compiègne, he obtained their consent to make the following division of the French Empire. To Carloman he gave Austrasia, Germany, and Thuringia. To Pepin, Neustria, Burgundy, and Provence. But a very small portion of territory was assigned to Griffon. This division gave rise to some commotions in Burgundy, but they were soon appeased by Pepin and his uncle Childebrand. Soon, in 741 AD, soon after he made these arrangements, Charles died at Caersipan Oise, in the 51st year of his age, and was interred with great pomp at the Abbey of Saint-Denis. Although his victories over the Saracens most probably preserved Europe from the impending yoke of Mahomet, yet his character had been impeached by the legends of the monks and the clergy, who resented the freedom with which he applied the revenues of the church to the defense of the Christian religion. Well, and they have not scrupled to enroll him among the damned. All right, so there's a bit of a problem there with the church and Charles. In a letter addressed to Louis, the grandson of Charlemagne, it is asserted that on opening the tomb of Charles Martel, the spectators were affrighted by the smell of fire and the aspect of a horrid dragon, and that a saint of the times was indulged with a vision of the fowl and body of the founder of the Carlovingian race burning in the abyss of hell. So the abyss of hell, good heavens, this is getting good, okay? But the story is of a very clumsy construction. For Saint Euchre of Rheims, to whom this wonderful vision is ascribed, certainly died before Charles Martel. It did make for a story, though. Affrighted, here they were, the spectators, the opening of the tomb, affrighted by the smell of fire, the aspect of a horrid dragon. I know it. Unbelievable. He's the founder of the Carlovingian race, burning in the abyss of hell. Good heavens, they were scared of that one. As if the devil himself. Charles was undoubtedly right in seizing the ecclesiastical property for the purpose of defending the church. So long as the clergy were able to defray these expenses, their revenues at this time were immense. The augmentation was owing, first, to their own industry in cultivating the barren lands that had been granted, secondly, to the indiscreet liberty of those who impoverished their families to enrich the ministers of the gospel, and lastly to tithes, which now had been paid for nearly 2 centuries. So they're trying to make up for lost time here and saying, oh, the rich paid priests, etc. They're trying to get all their money back and put it to the correct families. And that's 200 years we're talking, they're going back. All right, so these were at first a mere voluntary gift, though they were afterwards exacted as tribute. Saint Augustine recommends their payment as a work of charity. The Council of Tours inculcates the same idea, and the Second Council of Maison renders it obligatory. But though Charles was so far justifiable, yet some part of his conduct to the Church merits reprehension. Not content with taking to himself the most considerable benefices, he distributed the bishoprics and abbeys among the principal noblemen in his army, and he gave the livings to the subaltern officers, which opened a door to very flagrant abuses. So now Charles is handing over churches. He's saying, let's back to the noblemen they go. So you imagine we're talking that many years, the grudge being held generation to generation. We want everything back, give it back to us. The great fees, such as they're called fees, such as Rheims, Vienne, and Lyon, was soon destitute of patrons. The ecclesiastics, that they might not be despoiled of their livings, made no scruples to bear arms. Benefices became hereditary. They were converted into an article of commerce and divided among children, like any other possession. Inventories have been seen in which churches, altars, bells, ornaments, communion cups, crosses, and relics have been exposed to sale. Just sell it off. The abuses were carried still farther. Where a girl was married, her fortune frequently consisted of a church living, of which her husband received the tithes and chance perquisite. Some law writers themselves have regarded this liberality of Charles to his officers as the true epoch of feudal tithes, that is, of tithes holden as fiefs by noblemen or others of the laity. So Charles really did a lot. He went back and handed everything off. He says, no more rich churches. It's now belonging to noblemen, no more rich priests. The death of Charles occasioned great confusion. His daughter Hildetrud retired from court and, passing the Rhine, repaired to Bavaria, where she married Duke Odilon. Carloman and Pepin began persuaded that she was induced to the adoption of this measure by the intrigues of Sonnechild, who was discontented with the trifling inheritance of her son Griffon. Yeah, remember, he only got a small portion, a small place. He didn't get a lot of France. And now they're getting all upset about it. Well, he only got that. Okay. So let's find it. Yes. So in this case, so here she was induced by the adoption of this measure and so Sonnechild, she was discontented, the inheritance of her son, Griffon. Griffon got apparently not much. Resolved to secure both the prince and his mother, The queen, aware of their intentions, retired to Léon, which was reduced after an obstinate siege. Sonnyschild was by the victors dismissed to the Abbey of Chelles, and Griffon was confined in the castle of Neuchâtel, near the forest of Ardennes. Theodald, the son of Grimaud, did not experience an equal degree of indolence. His pretensions were powerful, and he was accordingly sacrificed to interest and ambition. 742. That's interesting, was sacrificed to interest and ambition. That is so much of the human state now. Most of us are sacrificed to those two. The two princes next marched against Hunald, Duke of Aquitaine, who, in violation of his oaths, refused to acknowledge their authority. He was speedily subdued, his country laid waste, and a renewal of homage exacted from him. During this expedition, they fixed the boundaries of their respective dominions, and Carloman, then passing the Rhine, advanced to the banks of the Danube and constrained the Germans to sue for peace. But about this time, Charles, the eldest son of Pepin, who afterwards acquired the name of Charlemagne from the splendor of his actions, was born at the castle of Engelheim near Mayence. So now we have Charlemagne Pepin. But the French were by no means satisfied with the long continuance of this interregnum. And those princes who paid tribute to the crown, though willing to acknowledge the authority of a monarch, refused to pay obedience to men who, they said, had annihilated royalty, and now oppressed the nobles. Influenced by these considerations, Pepin restored the regal title in Chilperic III. All right. So this is all about. I'm surprised, really. It should have been a time of just, hey, there's the king, and you think it, but it isn't. It was actually a time of no. There were more powers at play, weren't there? A lot more powers at play. The kings of later on, they seem to really have taken, you're the king, These dukes are powerful dukes, aren't they?